She walked into the hotel she built from the ground up, and the front desk clerk told her they had no room. Within an hour, the entire staff was learning a lesson they'd never forget. Clarice Rowland stepped out of the black sedan, one hand gripping her worn leather travel bag, the other adjusting her wide-brimmed hat to block the Florida sun. Tampa's heat pressed against her skin, but she didn't mind it. What she minded, what always struck her after long travel days, was how differently people looked at her when she wasn't dressed for a boardroom. She wore black sneakers, loose-fitting slacks, and a linen blouse. No jewelry, no makeup, no assistant trailing behind her. Just Clarice. Just tired. She paused in front of the automatic glass doors of Rowland Suites, one of her finest properties, 12 floors of marble and glass elegance, with a rooftop pool that had made the cover of Travel Luxe last spring. She didn't walk in expecting applause. She simply expected a bed. And maybe, if the kitchen was still open, the tomato bisque she helped design with the head chef back in 2013. The front desk was staffed by a young woman who couldn't have been more than 22. Her blazer was slightly too big, the nameplate crooked. Clarice noticed things like that, not to criticize, but because they mattered. Details told you how well a place was being run. Clarice gave a warm smile and stepped forward. "Evening," she said. "I've had a long day. I'll need a suite for the night. Something with a corner view, if possible." The receptionist glanced at her up and down. "We're fully booked." Clarice tilted her head slightly. "Is that so?" "Yes, ma'am." "There's a convention in town. Every room's gone." Clarice glanced behind her at the lobby screen mounted on the wall. It displayed a list of available rooms. 5 were still open, and she caught them before the screen blinked to the next page. "I see you've got vacancies listed right there." "Oh, that's probably an error," the receptionist said quickly, clicking her mouse. "Our system hasn't updated yet." Clarice didn't argue. She simply gave a polite nod. "Could you double-check?" The woman sighed and began typing. Clarice stood patiently, her hand resting on the counter. She was used to long waits. She'd once waited 5 hours in a real estate office back in 1989 to pitch her first hotel idea. This wasn't new, but there was something familiar in the young woman's tone that scratched at her memory. After a few clicks, the receptionist looked up again. "I'm sorry, we can't accommodate walk-ins right now." Clarice kept her voice calm. "I don't have a reservation, no, but I am—" Before she could finish, the woman cut her off. "You can try the Fairgrove Inn 2 blocks over. They're usually cheaper anyway." There it was. Clarice felt her shoulders tighten. But just for a second. She didn't let it show. The 2 women behind her in line shifted uncomfortably. A man at the bell desk looked over, then looked away. Clarice leaned in just slightly. "Do you know who I am?" The receptionist frowned. "No, should I?" "No, not necessarily," Clarice said softly. "But you should know your guests. All of them. Especially the ones whose portraits hang in the hallway behind you." The receptionist blinked, confused. She turned around and saw the oil painting in the gold frame. Clarice Rowland, founder, CEO, the woman whose name sat atop every branded pen, every card key, every pillow tag in the building. I didn't realize—" "You didn't ask." Clarice stepped back from the desk and pulled out her phone. Not frantic, not angry, just clear. She dialed a number, waited, and said 4 words. "I need a sweep." But before the call even ended, a familiar face from corporate was already walking through the front entrance. The receptionist's name tag read, Kaylee. Clarice noted it now, not out of spite, but principle. You remember names when someone disrespects you, and sometimes when they don't even realize they did. Kaylee was shifting awkwardly behind the counter, clicking at her keyboard with exaggerated focus, like a child pretending to be busy after being caught doing something wrong. Clarice watched, not saying a word. That silence, measured, intentional, was louder than anything she could have shouted. A moment later, the lobby doors parted again. In walked Roy Vellman, District Operations Manager. Mid-40s, grey at the temples, always smelled faintly of coffee and fresh printed paper. He spotted Clarice instantly. "Miss Rowland?" His voice pitched upward with nerves as he strode over, extending his hand. "I didn't know you were visiting Tampa this week." "I wasn't planning to," Clarice replied, still keeping her gaze on Kaylee. "But I needed to see things for myself." Roy turned toward the front desk, the realization slowly crawling across his face. His eyes flicked to the screen behind Kaylee, still displaying the available rooms in bold green. "Ma'am," he said to Kaylee carefully, "this is Ms. Clarice Rowland, the founder." Kaylee froze. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Roy didn't wait for her. He stepped behind the desk and quietly typed something into the system. A sweet key printed. He turned back to Clarice and handed it to her with both hands. "Corner suite, as always. Welcome back." Clarice took the keycard, but didn't move toward the elevators. She stood still, her posture flawless, her presence pressing gently into every corner of the room. "I want to hear what she was thinking," she said evenly, motioning toward Kaylee. Kaylee swallowed hard. I didn't recognize you. I thought you were just..." "Just what?" Clarice asked calmly. Kaylee's voice faltered. "Just someone walking in off the street." "And what made you think someone walking in off the street deserved to be turned away when rooms were clearly available?" I thought you might have been looking for something cheaper." "And..." Clarice raised one brow. "Something cheaper?" Kaylee nodded faintly. "I didn't mean any harm. I was just following policy." "What policy is that?" Clarice asked. Silence. Clarice looked at Roy. "You have a written policy that allows staff to turn away guests based on appearance." Roy shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am." Clarice exhaled slowly. Then what exactly was she following? A quiet tension filled the lobby now. Guests had stopped pretending not to listen. A couple near the elevator watched openly, suitcases in hand. A man at the bar turned his stool to face them. But Clarice didn't perform for the room. She was never one for theatrics. She was a builder. And builders dealt in foundations, not scenes. "I've spent 40 years creating a brand built on respect," she said, her tone steady. "Respect for the guest, respect for the staff, and respect for the name on the door." Roy nodded again, awkwardly, eyes flickering between the two women. "I understand," he said. "Would you like to speak privately?" "No," Clarice said. "This isn't a private matter. It's a cultural one." Kaylee's eyes were wet now, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Clarice didn't want her to feel small, but she did want her to understand. "I didn't come here looking for a confrontation," Clarice said gently. "I came here because I needed to remember what this place feels like when you walk in as someone who isn't dressed to impress." She looked around the lobby. "I built this place for everyone. Not just the polished, not just the rich. Everyone." But the message hadn't reached every desk, and Clarice was just getting started. Clarice didn't raise her voice. She never had to. By now, Roy had motioned for another associate to temporarily take Kaylee's place behind the desk. She stepped aside reluctantly, her face pale and tight, eyes blinking fast like she wasn't sure whether to cry or apologize. Maybe both. Clarice turned to Roy. "I want the entire front office team in the lounge in 15 minutes. Roy hesitated. "Ma'am, it's after 9. Some of the team's already gone home." "Then bring in whoever's left," Clarice said, still calm. "No yelling, no write-ups, just a conversation. If that's too much to ask at this hour, I'll reschedule for 6 a.m. Roy gave a short, silent nod and stepped away to make the calls. Clarice turned back toward the lobby, letting her eyes travel across the marble floor she chose herself, the textured blue wallpaper she fought the architects to keep, the art installations sourced from black artists across the country. None of it happened by accident. Every single detail in that hotel bore her fingerprint. She didn't build this for image. She built it because she remembered too well what it was like to be treated like an afterthought. While Roy made his calls, a young woman near the bar approached her, nervously adjusting the strap on her crossbody bag. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low. "I'm sorry, but are you Clarice Rowland?" Clarice offered a faint smile. "Yes, I am. My mom told me about you. She's in real estate. Said you were the first black woman to open a 5-star hotel in the Gulf Coast area. Clarice's eyes softened. That's true. The girl looked down, then back up. It's just cool to see you here. Like, actually here. Sometimes I show up unannounced. Clarice said with a wink. Keeps everyone honest? They both chuckled. Just then Roy returned. The staff's waiting in the lounge. Clarice nodded and followed him through the wide hallway, past the row of polished elevators, into a small glass-walled meeting room with soft lighting and grey leather chairs. 6 employees sat inside, faces ranging from confused to guilty. Kaylee sat furthest from the door. She looked up as Clarice entered, but didn't hold her gaze. Clarice walked in and stayed standing. I want to make something clear, she said. This isn't about shaming anyone. We're not here to talk about skin color, power, or even respect. Yet. We're here to talk about judgment. She paused, letting the word settle. Judgment is what happens when your assumptions speak before your professionalism. Judgment is when a woman in sneakers is treated differently than a man in a blazer. Judgment is how you lose loyal customers before they even get a room key. The staff sat quietly. No phones out, no distractions. I've been coming in and out of Roland Suites in all kinds of clothing for years. I've walked through these doors in silk and diamonds, and I've walked in wearing flats and sweatpants. The way I'm treated shouldn't change based on that. Clarice turned slightly toward Kaylee. And it shouldn't change for anyone else either. Kaylee opened her mouth to respond, but stopped herself. Clarice waited, gave her room. I didn't mean to disrespect you, Kaylee said finally. I really didn't. I believe you, Clarice said. But intention doesn't cancel impact. Kaylee looked down again. Her voice was barely audible. I made you feel like you didn't belong. Clarice nodded. And if I wasn't me, you'd have turned away another guest who needed shelter for the night. She turned to the rest of the room. That's what I care about. If we're going to use my name on the door, then every person who walks through that door better feel like they matter. A silence filled the room, but it wasn't heavy. It was reflective. But Clarice wasn't here just to talk. She had something to show them next. Clarice didn't sit down. She never did when she wanted people to truly listen. There was something about standing, about meeting eyes from above, that made her words hit harder without ever having to be loud. She glanced at the group, then said, I want to take you all somewhere. Right now. The room shifted. A few employees looked to Roy for guidance, but he offered none. Clarice was the only authority in the room now. She led them out of the lounge, back through the lobby, and toward the main hallway. Guests watched with quiet curiosity, unsure if they were witnessing a disciplinary meeting or a press conference. Clarice didn't look left or right. She moved forward, slow and sure, as if walking through the bones of her own legacy. They arrived at a small, quiet hallway near the concierge's office. At the far end, a large portrait hung on the wall. Clarice, at age 34, standing in front of her first hotel in St. Petersburg. The frame was slightly dusted, the lighting above it dim. Clarice stopped. This photo was taken 6 weeks after I signed the deal on my first property, she said. I used my mother's life insurance payout and 3 loans I wasn't supposed to qualify for. She turned to face them. I was denied a room once, in 1982. That's why I built Roland Suites, not to get revenge, but to make sure no one like me ever had to stand outside a hotel wondering if they'd be allowed in. The room was silent.